If you don't already know, I'm a pretty big Superman fan. And a few days ago, a little movie came out called... Of course, this is far from the first Superman movie, but it is the first Superman movie in a long time, and it has a lot of weight on its shoulders. Not only is it the start of a new movie universe, but it has the responsibility to restore the public image of the character. For years, people argued about how Superman isn't a compelling character, how in nature, the concept of a character that is all-powerful and a do-gooder is inherently boring. One of the main taglines of this film throughout its development was, how does Superman interact in a world that views kindness as old-fashioned, in our modern 2020s world? But Superman wasn't always a character in the year 2025. There was a Superman in 1948, 1951, 1978, 1993, 2001, 2006, 2013, 2021, and finally, our year 2025. Each of these versions of the characters were in some way particular to the time, each telling a different story appropriate to the audience of the era. It's just how art works and evolves. And just as movies and TV narratively evolve, so does the merchandising of the time. Toys, action figures, I love them. They've changed along with these movies. And for nearly 2 months, I reviewed a Superman figure every single day until the release of the new movie. I have spent every single moment thinking about this character, the movies, the comics, and most importantly, action figures. It's in my name. I'm Hoechlin Figures, and this is Superman in live action media and action figures, a retrospective. The first Superman movie, well, series of serials, so not technically a movie by today's standards, was released in 1948 and featured Kirk Alyn as the character. I watched some of these serials and they have a lot of charm. I haven't seen too many older movies outside of like the really popular ones, so it was a fun look at a different era. But there weren't any action figures for this movie at the time, and there aren't any officially released today, so I gotta move on, unfortunately. While not a feature film in the way we consider it today, George Reeves appeared in the film Superman and the Mole Man, a 58-minute feature released as an extended pilot pretty much to the TV show Adventures of Superman, which starred George Reeves as well. Reeves was an icon of the time. As far as many children were concerned, he was Superman. I mean, George Reeves even appeared in a crossover episode of I Love Lucy where he plays himself playing Superman at a birthday party, and the children think he's actually the character. Dumb kids. He's an actor. Ever heard of fiction, genius? I don't really have the time to talk extensively about George Reeves' Superman, so I'll leave you with this. There's a scene where he turns Lois on her side to use her as like a stopper for a trash compactor, and I think it's really funny. Anyway, there's no official toys or figures of this version of the character, so you gotta move on. Okay, so this one is a little complicated because Christopher Reeve had Superman action figures made of him, but after he died in the mid-2000s. And I have a couple figures from before the mid-2000s I want to show off a little later, so I'll talk about the action figures towards the end of the video, and I'll talk about the films right now. While the last two actors embodied their characters in their own iconic ways, to many, Christopher Reeve is still the greatest Superman of all time, and I might be part of that crowd. To the point where artists like Gary Frank will illustrate their versions of the character in mainline comics to just look like Christopher Reeve. It makes sense why this depiction of the character was so impactful to many, on a technical special effects level alone. I mean, I'm sure as a kid in 1978, it would be insane to see Superman actually flying on screen. His performance has been talked about to death, how his unassuming, bumbling Clark Kent has the perfect balance of physical comedy and meekness, but his Superman is full of confidence and presence. The contrast of the two is often how people justify the glasses disguise of the character. The scene in Lois's apartment where he takes off his glasses being one of my favorite scenes in any Superman media ever. However, I think one of the problems, not with his performance alone, but the general direction of how Clark-Superman dynamic was portrayed, is that the whole Clark is the bumbling nerd, Superman is the confident and charming thing, was really fun for the first movie at least, in the first couple movies. But after a while, you start to wonder, or at least I do, who's the real guy? I think the assumption, at least in Superman 2, is that when Clark hangs the cape up, he is Superman through and through. And I don't know if I necessarily like that perspective. Maybe it's just because we don't spend much time with him as the real person behind closed doors throughout the series, minus Superman 2 and some of Superman 4, so we don't really get the ability to see what he's really like, but the idea that Superman, the quote-unquote performance, the guy who he is in front of the press and in front of supervillains, is also the guy who goes home and eats dinner alone, it's kind of uninteresting to me, I'm sorry. It's like if you made a biopic about a famous actor or a famous artist, and you get to see the way they interact with the audience, the way they interact on stage, but you don't see what happens behind closed doors in their life. Or at least maybe you do see what happens in their personal life, but they act exactly the same as they do on stage or with fans. I don't know, like, isn't that the whole point of fleshing these characters out, to see what they're really like? And I don't mean that to say that we don't see Christopher Reeve Superman act emotionally. We see that a lot, and I really appreciate those scenes. I just mean that, I don't know, maybe it would have been nice to spend a little bit more time with him. To wrap up this section about the movies generally, I think by modern standards, it's really easy to say that they're boring. There's not much action. The action that is there is not particularly captivating from a modern action movie perspective, but I don't think that matters. I think the thing, at least to me as somebody who grew up in the modern era, that makes these movies stand the test of time are the character moments. But I want to shine light on one of my favorite moments in the entire series. Something that I think is an incredibly underrated Christopher Reeve moment, and honestly Richard Lester directing moment, which is funny because it's in Superman 3 and people hate the Superman 3 and 4 movies. It's a scene after Clark's high school reunion, where Clark is talking to Lana. And Lana talks to him about how her marriage didn't quite work out. And she asks Clark if he ever settled down with anyone. You never got married? And the way Christopher Reeve responds, there's a moment of hesitation where he tries to come up with some excuse to why he never settled down. But he can't find the words. And he just stops talking. He goes up to the piano and starts playing Earth Angel. And it's this solemn but romantic moment of these two characters who were each other's ones that got away. And there's so much tension there, but it also feels like two people effortlessly talking to each other after years, and it's so good and it hits me every time, which is something really funny to say about Superman 3. All of this is to say that these movies, while maybe dated in some ways, stand the test of time because of these little character moments like these. And Christopher Reeve will always be a legend, in and outside of the screen. You see, I was like a baby when Superman Returns came out, and I didn't really rewatch them when I was younger, even though I had the DVD. So naturally, I'm not a big fan of this movie. And when I rewatched it, I still think I hold that opinion. I think that they held back Brandon Routh's performance by making him just emulate Christopher Reeve, which is hard to do for a new actor. And I think there are also a lot of just really weird elements, like Clark being the father of Lois's kids without either of them, or at least Lois, knowing, which has terrible moral implications. There isn't a lot of action in this movie, and all the action that is there is pretty bland, even for mid-2000s standards. However, there's a lot of witty dialogue that I thought was genuinely really funny, and I was surprised by when I rewatched this movie in anticipation for this video.
Wow, that's really something, Lex.
Wait for it.
Wow, that's really something.
But overall, my biggest takeaway is Kevin Spacey's Lex Luthor might be the best part of this movie, which is disappointing to say because, well, it's Kevin Spacey. I don't even think he's that good of a Lex Luthor. He's just so entertaining to watch in this film. Unlike Christopher Reeve, they actually made toys for this movie while it was coming out. And oh boy, did they make toys for this movie. In fact, probably way too many toys. They went absolutely bonkers with the marketing for this movie when it came out in 2006.
Here and now, Superman Returns toys at Burger King. They're rateable, one for kid meal. You can choose a healthy treat like applesauce. Have it your way.
Of course, some premium brands like Hot Toys and even Takara Tomy made some products for this film, but Mattel had the license to producing DC action figures commercially at the time. They produced 10-inch, 12-inch, a superposable 13-inch version of Superman, and being Mattel, they even made a Barbie. But their main line was a 5-inch scale, very gimmicky toy line. You wanted Superman with truck-holding action? You got Superman with truck-holding action. You want heat vision, X-ray, wall-busting, spacesuit Superman? You got it. They even made a Superman toy with a cardboard cutout of Kevin Spacey, and the action feature is that you blow him away. But the one toy I always wanted from this line was the Clark to Superman figure, where you can put a Clark Kent disguise over Superman. And in anticipation for this video, I didn't buy it. I did buy one of these figures. That's right, the X-Ray Alert Superman. And I wasn't expecting much at all from this figure, but it's oddly a lot of fun. I think it's because we don't really get gimmicky action figures in our modern era, so this figure has a lot of charm looking back. The gimmick is that he has spring-loaded arms, and when you pull them back, they spring forward. He comes with a totally regular and normal safe, which you can put in his arms, and when he throws them forward, a chunk of kryptonite with a bomb comes out. I was kidding. It is not a totally regular and normal safe, you fool. As for the details, like many, I've never really liked this suit. The colors are weird, his logo is small, and I've never liked the logo on the belt. However, this figure does a really good job at adapting the costume, especially for a kid's toy. It's covered with texture, the colors are honestly perfectly accurate, and the fine details like the logo and the belt are correctly sized and also accurate. The only thing that holds this figure back on an aesthetic scale is the proportions and the likeness. They made him super jacked, which is definitely not accurate, but I still kind of like the look. Again, it's very of the era of the marketing. As for the face, there were a couple main neutral head portraits from this toy line for some reason, and they all look like completely different guys. But I think the one on this figure is probably the most accurate to Brandon Routh, but it still doesn't really look anything like him. I'm not gonna go in deep dive as to why it does and doesn't look like him, but for a kid's toy in 2006, it's not so bad. The articulation, of course, is limited due to the gimmick, but I do want to point out he has a double ball peg on the neck, which is particularly well done. I think it's just because my standards are so low due to Hasbro's inability to engineer a double ball peg, but it works. So overall, Superman Returns is a mid-movie with some toys that I'm sure were really fun for kids at the time.
Chicken isn't vegan?
Okay, so I know that Smallville started about 5 years before Superman Returns released, but I wanted to talk about the Reeves/Routh section and make it flow a little better, so I'm talking about Smallville now. And Smallville finished in 2010, so I'm technically not wrong. Anyway, Smallville is a very interesting show. I binge watched all of it in 2 weeks during COVID, which is a crazy amount of television to consume in that time period, but in my defense, it was COVID, so. And in anticipation for this video and movie, I rewatched all 10 seasons, approximately 8 days of television, just for one video. No, I'm kidding. You think I actually did that? But Smallville had a very specific charm to it. It started as the concept of what would Clark Kent be like in his teenage years, developing powers while still having the daily struggles of a high school student. And it quickly turned into, yeah, let's just make this guy do all the Superman stuff before his career as Superman starts. Like, he fights and wins against Doomsday, gets trapped in the Phantom Zone, assembles a proto-Justice League, meets Supergirl, the JSA, Earth-3 Ultraman, the Legion of Superheroes, works for the Daily Planet for several years, gets cloned and meets Connor Kent Superboy, and marries Lois. All before he flies and becomes Superman. But I get it from a business standpoint. They need to give the fans what they want while also staying true to the original concept and not turning it into a full-fledged Superman show. Also, Booster Gold's in the show. I think most of the charm looking at it in retrospect comes from the fact that it's a product of the era, which is something we're seeing a lot through this video. It's almost like I made that part of my thesis. But the campiness, especially in the early seasons, is so much fun. As the later seasons develop and start adding more comic book elements, it is easy to call this corny and dismiss it just because the effects are cheap and not convincing at all. But at that point of the show, you're so invested in these characters, I don't think it matters. There's a lot of really good stuff in this show, like Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor, the Clois dynamic that built up over many seasons, and even the supporting cast. I love both of Clark's parents and his friends. I think Tom Welling's Clark Kent is pretty good. He has the advantage of being able to watch him over literally 10 years, but honestly, there has never been anything particularly memorable about his performance as the superhero Clark Kent, like the assertive figure. I don't know, I always just thought he was way more interesting when he's playing comedically.
Crown's mine, bitch. Genius.
Anyway, let's talk toys.
In 2001, DC Direct released a line of action figures to coincide with the TV show's release. In this line, we got Clark Kent, cheerleader Lana Lang, and Lex Luthor. I only have Clark from this line, and it definitely shows with his age. The head is kinda freaky, but I kinda do get what they're trying to do with the likeness. He comes with some fun accessories though, like a backpack, a chunk of kryptonite, and some kryptonite-infested hands. He barely articulates at all, but it's also a 2001 figure, so I can't really complain, because the best Clark Kent figure was yet to come. Later, in 2008, DC Direct released yet another line of Smallville figures, this time to capitalize on the heroes of the series. They made Clark, Cyborg, Impulse, Aquaman, and Green Arrow. I only have Clark, but these figures had more articulation and more detail than the previous attempts. But unlike their previous attempts, it looks like they might have not been going for full accuracy with these figures. They all have a shared, more muscular aesthetic compared to their real-life counterparts. But maybe that was just a coincidence and the sculptors truly did not mean to exaggerate that much with their proportions of these figures, but I doubt it considering how accurate DC Direct normally gets. But either way, I don't think it's that distracting, and he still looks pretty accurate to the show. He doesn't come with much though, only a display base. His articulation is also very limited, as that's kind of DC Direct's model. Make really good looking figures, but have them articulate not so well. But he works perfectly just standing there in your collection and looking pretty. But in 2010, to commemorate the conclusion of the series, DC Direct released one final Smallville action figure. Clark Kent in his Season 10 Superman jacket costume. However, this figure was part of a DVD box set exclusive to Best Buy, so it's incredibly hard to find online, and even harder to find for a good price, so unfortunately, I don't have it. It reuses some parts from the 2008 Clark figure, like the legs, but with newly sculpted pieces like the jacket and a new head sculpt. But this new head sculpt, in my opinion, is way worse than the 2008 Clark figure. It really doesn't look like Tom Welling to me. Like, seriously, this head sculpt might be worse than the 2001 head, I don't know.
This movie, nor Henry Cavill, needs an introduction. And people have talked about this movie to death online, so I'll be quick. And by quick, I mean, I don't know how fast I'll be. But this movie meant a lot to me when it came out. I must have been like 7 or so, and I remember going to the theater wearing a Henry Cavill Superman shirt. This movie was a really big deal to me. Not only watching it in the theater, but also leading up to it. Almost similar to how excited I am for this new Superman movie. And after I finally watched it in the theater, I never really rewatched it ever again. No actual reason. It's not like I hated it, I just never did, I don't know. But I rewatched it recently, and I think this movie holds up well enough as a different version of Superman. I'm not the biggest Henry Cavill Superman fan, but I understand it. This isn't the Superman of the golden, silver, bronze, or modern eras. This is Zack Snyder's Superman. This is a Superman who is still trying to navigate his moral compass. He's essentially not Superman yet. And I think that's an awesome concept. I love the idea of Superman being in a harsher world, one where he needs to question what the right thing is and one where it's not so easy to do. However, I think Snyder's movies missed the mark in trying to portray Superman as a hopeful figure in a world that needs some color. See, we are told what his character is, but we don't really see it, and tonally, it makes the character feel distant, at least to me. I know he's supposed to be this figure that people look up to, that people are inspired by, but I don't really feel it, you know? We don't see him doing those things that justify these reasons. I still think Man of Steel is an incredibly interesting deconstruction of the character. And I really enjoy the first hour of the movie, setting up Clark as a character who's lost in the world. Because that is an important part of the Clark Kent character and something we didn't really see in the Christopher Reeve or Brandon Routh films. But everything after the first flight kind of just blends into the background to me. The action sequences are cool though. I'm not going to go over the destruction element because that's talked about to death, nor will I talk about the John Kent or the neck snap scenes. But just know, if you have an opinion on them, I probably agree with them. Unless it's an insane opinion, in that case, I don't. And I don't want to keep harping on this because I don't think he's that bad, but one of the lines of dialogue in this movie, the delivery is so funny and is so robotic that I need to share it with you.
Don't play games with me, General.
Don't play games with me, General. I don't even know if it's a problem of his performance. It sounds like an ADR or like a dubbing problem, but that line is so funny to me. Also, he literally does the anime Debbie Ryan face thing during this interview.
Okay, finally, now on to the toys. Just like Superman Returns, there are a lot of toys for this movie, and I have a lot of them. A lot more than I have for any other Superman actor. Mattel still had the master license to DC at the time, so they pretty much carried the main domestic release toy lines. The biggest line they had was the Movie Masters line, and the budget-friendly 1/18th scale toy line. For those unaware, the Movie Masters line was pretty much a collector line. The equivalent of DCUC or Marvel Legends, but just for specifically movie figures. And I still remember the day that I got the Movie Master Superman. I remember staring at the packaging, the way the logo was set behind the figure, the plastic shell shaped to mimic the diamond of the logo. I stared at it for like 5 minutes before taking a shower, not opening it because I wanted to savor the experience for the rest of the night. Mine's pretty beat up, but the details are quite nice on this figure. The head sculpt doesn't really look much like him, at least not in the way it's painted, maybe. The prototypes look pretty good, but the official one, you know. The body is sculpted very well though. It looks proportionally really accurate to the film. He's not too jacked, he's not too skinny, it's just right. And the texture is well pronounced, but not too much so. The actual suit intricacies, like the lining and the belt buckle, are also very clean. The colors might be a little bit too saturated, but I think that works. And the gold looks good. Of course, there are many other companies that made figures like Hot Toys, which I actually own, but I'm not going to go over that here, but it's a decent figure. Also, NECA and Playarts Kai made figures, just to name a couple more companies. And I actually always really wanted both of these figures. Of course, there is also Batman vs. Superman, Justice League, and the Snyder Cut. But I don't really want to go into any of those movies or those figures because the same companies I mentioned made figures for those movies, along with other companies like Mezco, Beast Kingdom, Fonjoy, and many more. But I do want to highlight McFarlane Superman. None of the releases of the McFarlane Henry Cavill Superman were intended to be Man of Steel versions, but it's close enough. He was initially released as a black costume version as part of the Zack Snyder's Justice League toy line, but they made a Target exclusive Superman with the red and blue costume, which I have. This figure definitely sucks. I've heard a lot of people say that this looks like Henry Cavill, and I guess I kind of see it, but it's not very close or good at all. All of his features are very soft, and the paint isn't very realistic, and the simplicity of the paint just makes it look cartoony. Even more, they made his neck kind of long and bent, so it looks like he's permanently slouching, which doesn't help the fact that they made him kind of lanky. The biggest offender of his lankiness is definitely the long monkey-esque arms. Oh yeah, he also skipped calf day and feet day. At least the metallic colors are really nice, though they're used very sparingly. The articulation is terrible, and the plastic is too hard around the torso and the crotch so he can barely crunch or move his legs. This was also before McFarlane started using cloth capes, and the rubber cape they gave him is really poor quality, even worse than most of the ones they've done in the past. It also makes the figure really top heavy, which makes it even more unbearable. But if for some reason you still want this figure after everything negative I've said about it, they actually did re-release him with a wired cloth cape and some accessories in the Batman vs. Superman 2-pack with Doomsday. Also, gonna go super nerd mode right now, but I was really hoping that the BVS version of the figure would come with a new head sculpt, as his hair was parted a different way in that movie, and it would also give McFarlane the chance to give us an improved likeness, just like they did with the Wonder Woman from this line. But no, same old, terrible, and in this case, inaccurate head sculpt. Overall, this is one of the biggest misses from McFarlane, ever. Which is so funny to me because the Batman and the Cyborg they released from this wave are really, really good. Oh yeah, also I have the Mafex figure from the Snyder Cut, but I'm not gonna review that right now. It's a Mafex figure, so it's pretty good, but it's a little bit off topic since it's not a Superman movie or a domestically released figure, which I'm mostly going over right now. I'm cheating with this one a little bit because there are no official toys for this show, though there is a third-party 1/6 scale figure, which looks really great and I've always really wanted it. But Superman and Lois is my favorite live-action Superman depiction. Full stop. At least not until the movie comes out. I don't know if that'll change it. Tyler Hoechlin is up there with Christopher Reeve as my favorite Superman depiction. And I think most of that is purely due to the material he's given. He's given a lot to work with, a lot more to grasp on compared to the other Supermen. But outside of that, his Superman and Clark Kent is just so captivating. He's charming, nerdy, wholesome, hunky. And overall, he's just a perfect fit for the character. Many people say that he doesn't look like Superman, but I'd argue that he looks just like a Jim Lee drawing. Also, I love the fact that he's a dad in the show and all the family stuff I just love, but I don't want to talk about that for too long. In short, go watch this show, please. Maybe it's not as good as everybody says it is, but it's still super, super solid. And I should really finish my custom figure of this character. So Christopher Reeve has a much different action figure history compared to the other actors. Unlike the other big screen actors, he did not have action figures released at or even around the same timeline of his films. See, it's a story that's mostly passed down by word of mouth, but it seems like the general theory was that it was a mix of the fact that in 1978, action figures just weren't as popular as they were throughout the 80s, and Christopher Reeve not wanting his face on a lot of merchandising back then because of typecasting. But there were companies that tried to work around the likeness issue. For example, DC Direct released a Superman figure from the comic series New Krypton, great comic by the way, with a head sculpt modeled off art by Gary Frank. But Gary Frank modeled his artwork on Christopher Reeve, so the figure pretty much looks exactly like Christopher Reeve. It wasn't until 2010 that I think companies officially were legally allowed to produce Christopher Reeve merchandising, so Mattel was the first to bite. In Mattel's 12-inch branch of their Movie Masters line, they released 3 cloth goods figures based off the Donner films: Lex Luthor, General Zod, and of course, Superman. These figures are pretty much just premium Barbie dolls, and the likenesses are pretty great to kind of
bad. After Mattel did their 12-inch Superman, Hot Toys followed, and I unfortunately don't have either versions of that Hot Toys figure. Then Mattel followed up again with their 1/18 scale Superman, one that I would really like to own, but it's worth way too much on eBay for me to justify it. Next up, NECA did their run on Superman. Firstly, they did a quarter scale 18-inch Superman, which looks amazing in my opinion, but he's a little bit too gaunt looking, especially in the face. Plus, the torso is a little bit too long. Of course, this figure is also huge, so I never bought it. But what I did manage to buy was the 1/10 scale 7-inch Superman. This was a Toys R Us exclusive at the time in the US, and this one, now this one's what we're talking about. It essentially is just a shrunken down version of their quarter scale figure, but they did modify it just a little bit. His torso is still a little bit long, but his face looks much better. His head isn't as elongated and he doesn't look as gaunt. The details are so crisp and the colors are so vibrant and the sculpt is so clean and detailed. It has this texture throughout the suit, but it's not too detailed. It looks convincingly like fabric. Articulation wise, he doesn't have the most, but definitely good enough to get in some good poses. Now for the negatives. This guy is very fragile and historically has broken a lot on a lot of collectors. Even mine broke, but it was a minor break, so luckily I was able to fix it. Even with these flaws, I still think this is the greatest Christopher Reeve Superman figure at this scale, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because first I need to talk about the Mezco 1/12 Collective 2021 release of Christopher Reeve Superman. This one's a bit different from all the other entries in this series. He's a cloth goods figure, but I customized mine a bunch because I really didn't like the bodysuit or the actual body itself, both of which I think look very awkward. They were close, but it looks a little bit too Mego-like, with a big head, stubby limbs, and a fat torso. The suit looked good enough, but the cape attachment was way too thick and puffy. Plus, the heads honestly don't look that much like Christopher Reeve in my opinion. But the saving grace of this figure, as is with every Mezco figure, is the sheer amount of accessories. My favorite being the Forces of Solitude diorama, of course. Lastly, McFarlane tackled Christopher Reeve Superman last year. This figure had technically three releases. The comic book Page Punchers version, based off the comic Superman 78, and secondly, the Collector Edition, based strictly off the movies. However, the Collector Edition had a Platinum Chase variant, which is the evil Superman from Superman 3. All three of these figures are kinda mid. I know a lot of people in the collecting community love them, but I think they're overrated. The likenesses are definitely more than a bit off, especially on the Collector Edition figures, which is really funny to me because this figure, allegedly, got delayed because McFarlane Toys was told by the Christopher Reeve estate that the likenesses were not good enough, so they needed to improve it. I really want to know what it looked like before. Because the final product, it looks like they gave him a broken nose and like they sculpted two parts of the face uneven, like in a different scale. You're noticing I'm not using pictures of my copy of the head because I repainted mine, and even with the repaint, I don't think it looks much like him. Which is even funnier because I think the Page Punchers likeness, which is supposed to look more exaggerated, looks more like Christopher Reeve. It's just covered in paint so you can't tell. I repainted mine and I think it looks much better than the Collector Edition, though the eyes are definitely too big. But again, comic book likeness, I get it. The proportions on these figures are also kind of off. It makes sense for the Page Punchers to look kind of weird since it's supposed to be a comic book, but the other two just don't look right. They're a little bit too lanky, and I know Christopher Reeve was relatively lanky, but he wasn't that skinny. The overall just made him too skinny, lanky, and with a big, long head. All three of them come with the same set of hands, with the Collector Editions coming with two different head sculpts. The Page Punchers also came with an issue of Superman 78. The only point that I think is better on this figure compared to any of the others is the articulation. You can get him in some pretty good poses, but that's about it. However, the future of Christopher Reeve Superman figures looks pretty bright. We have at least 3 more lines coming. Firstly, we have Spin Master doing their 1/18 scale retro-inspired Superman figures. And then we have Beast Kingdom's 1/9 scale Superman, which looks very questionable to me. And last but not least, we have the In-Art Collectibles 1/6 scale Superman and Clark Kent. These two look like they're going to be the best Christopher Reeve Superman figures ever from any scale. Which makes sense because it's a very premium toy. I really hope those two go up for pre-order soon, and also they don't cost $1,000, but it's probably going to be the case.
Well, here we are. After 2.5 years of speculation and development, this movie is finally out, and I can confidently say that it's pretty good. It's good, yeah, it's really good, I guess. Like probably my favorite, if not my second favorite Superman movie good. But to be fair, the bar is pretty low. I'm not gonna go into spoilers, but this is exactly what I want from a modern Superman story. It's far from perfect, but it's still very solid.
And there are just about a million videos of people breaking down this movie so far, and honestly, I don't have much to say that is different from what someone else has said, but to me, the comic booky, ridiculous nature of this film is perfect and created a new aesthetic and viewing experience for the audience. This is not the scenario of, what if superheroes existed in our real world? It is, what if superheroes were the norm in another world? And I am so here for it. It's almost like they heard that people were slowly getting tired of superhero films or superhero fatigue or whatever, so they turned it up to 100% and made everything as crazy as they possibly could. But most importantly, David Corenswet's performance is up there with Tyler Hoechlin and Christopher Reeve as my favorite depictions of the character, both in his actual performance of the actor and also the material he's given. This is one of the few Superman that I can imagine waking up, getting out of bed, eating a bowl of cereal, tying his shoes, and going to work. This isn't a Superman that we look up to as a larger-than-life figure. I don't like using this phrase, but this isn't the quote-unquote godlike Superman. But this is a Superman that I believe I can live beside as a friend, an inspiration, but at the end of the day, just a dude. Just some guy, just like one of us. So overall, pretty good, really good. 7.5 to 8 out of 10, something like that. It's not the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it's probably the best superhero movie I've seen in a very, very long time. Now for the figures. At this point, I've talked to death about the Spin Master figures and the McFarlane ones, so I'm not going to go over that right now, but I do want to talk about some of the upcoming stuff. So let's do that. The Fonjoy looks pretty good, better than the McFarlane in most ways, the colors and kit for example, but the most important way, I think the McFarlane still wins, which is the likeness. The likeness on the McFarlane just looks more like him. But those proportions are definitely more lifelike and accurate than the McFarlane's, especially that neck. Either way, I will be buying this. The SH Figure Arts looks genuinely kind of terrible. The articulation cuts are awkward, the colors are off, he's over-textured, but most of all, that head sculpt is rough. I think the sculpt itself is okay, but the paint job is very, very interesting. He's way too orange, and they overpronounce the detailing, so it looks like he's in heavy makeups. So I am not buying this. The NECA quarter scale Superman, which means he's gonna be about 18 inches. Now listen. I know there is a lot of criticism about this figure, but I think the sculpt is actually pretty good. I mean, it helps that it's a huge figure, so they have room for detail, but it still looks pretty great. However, this figure is obviously a little bit awkward, maybe it's the articulation or the way it's engineered, but most of NECA's quarter scale humanoid figures have this weird, awkward look to them. That being said, I would love to pair this guy with my quarter scale Donatello, as both of them are very, very important movies to me, but we'll see. If this ever goes on sale, which I honestly think it will because most of these big figures don't sell too well, I'd love to buy it and I'd give it a makeover with paint. So, as it stands, I might be buying this, and if I do, I'll definitely customize it. Beast Kingdom. This looks terrible. Like, actually awful. I barely have anything good to say about it. The body is too smooth. The proportions, while not terrible, the articulation cuts definitely take away from the aesthetic. And the colors are also incredibly off, probably just as off as the SH Figure Arts. But worst of all, that likeness. Oh man. It looks like if you warped Christopher Reeve's face into David Corenswet and then upscaled it with AI to create this, whatever this is. Even Crypto looks pretty weird, and that's just a dog. So overall, very, very, very bizarre looking figure. I will not be buying this. The Hot Toys. To get this out of the way, the musculature and certain suit details are a bit off, like the logo size, and of course he's too buff, he has big arms, but the biggest point of contention for this figure, at least to me, is the head sculpt. I think it's about 70 to 80% there, but they made his face a little bit too flat, and the hair is a little spiky and less flowy like it should be in the movie, and I do think it overall looks better in these expo in-hand shots than it does in the professional promo shots, so that's good. It looks like it looks good in hand. Crypto looks kind of cheap, and so does the base, but for $285, this is not an unreasonable ask from Hot Toys, in my opinion. I don't think it's that crazy priced. So yes, I am buying this, and I have pre-ordered it. Lastly, what many consider to be the winner of this inexistent contest, the InArt collectibles. What many consider to be Hot Toys' biggest competitor, because, I mean, they pretty much are. At first, I was sold on this one as the obvious winner between the two, Hot Toys and InArt, but I think they are almost even in different ways. Sure, this one looks much more lifelike and has the arguably more accurate head sculpt, suit, and proportions, but in my opinion, at least after watching the movie, it doesn't quite capture the essence of the character in the way that the Hot Toys does. Let me explain. This one is stern, and the suit, at least in these photos, isn't as bright. And his alternate head is of him closing his eyes, which is something he does a fair amount in the movie, but still. This might be the better Superman collectible figure on a technical scale, but both the Hot Toys and the in-art bring something different to the table. One's more classical and the other's more Renaissance. I don't actually think that means anything what I just said, but it sounds smart, so I'm leaving it in the video. However, I do love that this one has an unwired drape cape though. I love me some neutral cape options, so I'm definitely gonna be using that. Also, yes, I am buying this and I have pre-ordered it as well. So that's it. Over 2 years of following a film and almost 2 months dedicated to creating content based around this movie, and is this my conclusion? Are we done talking about Superman on this channel? Obviously not. But I will probably take a very light step back from focusing on solely Superman content for a while, just because the movie's already out. I don't really have to do all that hype stuff anymore. But of course, I'll always be talking about Superman and Superman figures. But, you know, there are a lot of things that I've been meaning to work on outside of Superman, and now that the movie's out and I have this video out, I hope to take that opportunity to work on those videos as well. This has been an incredibly fun ride. Something that I hope I can look back on in the future of my content creating and action figure career. Truly, thank you to everyone who's kept up with any of this content and interacted with me online. And if this is the first video you've seen from me, thanks for staying. This character means so much to me and millions around the world, and I am so grateful to be just the smallest part of somebody's viewing experience for this film. A like, subscribe, comment, share, and follow on Instagram and TikTok at Hoechlfigures would be much, much appreciated. But for now, I'll see you in the next video, whenever that may be. Up, and away!
It was fun. When we were drinking, it was fun. When we were drunk, and it was fun. When we were laughing, it was fun. Oh, it was fun. Well, I look at you and say it's the happiest that I've ever been. And I'll say, I no longer feel I have to be James Dean. And she'll say, yeah, well, I feel pretty happy too. And I'm always pretty happy when I'm just kicking back with you. And there'll be love all through our bodies. There'll be love